Hello, everyone, and happy Pollinator Month. Welcome to PPAN's June 2026 webinar, Understanding and Protecting Fireflies, with the Peleg Lab's Dr. Orit Peleg. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anna Gray Anderson, and I am the Community Engagement Manager for People and Pollinators Action Network, or PPAN for short. For those of you who aren't familiar with our webinar series, we usually host a monthly event, so be sure to sign up for our e-news and check out our events calendar to keep up to date with everything we got going on, especially a lot of fun stuff during Pollinator Month, and we will put these links in the chat for you. But before we get started, we wanted to tell you just a little bit more about us. So like I said, we are PPAN, the host of this webinar. We focus a lot on making Colorado a safe haven for all who live here, from people to pollinators. We do this through grassroots advocacy, education, and outreach, kind of like this webinar. We also do a lot of policy work, community mobilization, and habitat creation. A good example of this is our recent state policy win of House Bill 261132 that prioritizes the use of native plants on state-owned lands. Another example is our Habitat Fund grants program, which is based on the sales of the pollinator license plate, and that goes towards creating pollinator safe spaces while promoting community mobilization. And I did just want to emphasize the significance of the Protect Pollinators license plate. PPAN championed the legislation that created this plate, and the majority of the donations for the plate go directly to funding our Protect Our Pollinators Habitat Fund. So that's our small grants program, and since 2023, we've been able to support 96 projects, which has resulted in the creation of about 65 acres of pollinator safe habitat. So by getting a plate, you'll be contributing directly to getting more native plants in the ground, which leads to more pollinators. And we will also put this link in the chat. And again, we just wanted to wish you all a happy Colorado Pollinator Month. PPAN has worked with the governor's office since 2017 to designate June as Colorado Pollinator Month, and we have lots of ways you can celebrate with us. First would be to post on the iNaturalist Colorado Pollinator Month project page to help contribute to community science. Second is to get a limited edition PPAN t-shirt. This year's design says, "My milkweed brings all the bugs to the yard." And finally, you can attend a pollinator event this month. We're especially excited about the Big Day of Bugs on June 26th at the Denver Botanic Gardens. And then we'll put these links in the chat as well. And then we're really, really honored and thankful to have Dr. Orit Peleg with us today. Dr. Peleg is the leader of the Peleg Lab, where she seeks to understand the behavior of disordered living systems by merging tools from physics, biology, engineering, and computer science. Her research is aimed at understanding how biological communication signals are generated and interpreted, and she uses insect swarms as a model system for identifying how organisms harness the dynamics of communication signals, perform spatiotemporal integration of these signals, and propagate those signals to neighboring organisms. Examples include fireflies who communicate over long distances using light signals, and bees who serve as signal amplifiers to propagate pheromone-based information about the queen's location. Dr. Peleg is a global leader in the physics of living systems, and in addition to her faculty appointment at CU Boulder's BioFrontiers and in the Department of Computer Science, she is also affiliated with the Departments of Physics, Applied Math, and Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. She's also an external faculty member of the Santa Fe Institute, and she has won numerous distinguished awards for her research and teaching. And we can put a link in the chat where you can learn even more about her. She is so impressive, and we are just so happy to have her with us today. And then before we get started, and just as a reminder, please stay muted throughout the presentation. Leave your questions in the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation, time permitting. We're also recording this presentation, and we'll post it to our YouTube channel soon. So there will be an email coming to you all with the link to the recording, Dr. Peleg's slides, and other resources. And we encourage you to make a donation today so that PPAN can continue to host this free webinar series and to support our education, advocacy, and habitat creation efforts. A donation of any size really does make a difference, so thank you for your consideration. And again, another way to support this work is by getting that pollinator license plate or that limited edition PPAN t-shirt. And again, we'll put everything in the chat for you guys. Thanks again for being here, and I will pass it off to Dr. Peleg.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. Great. Yes. So I will talk about how we're trying to understand and monitor fireflies. And actually, the introduction that Anna Gray gave is very nice. So I don't have to spend too much time here, but I just wanted to say that um, my training is in physics and computer science, and I at some point kind of fell in love with insects and their behavior, and I'm using physics and computer science as a tool or a lens to try to understand biology. Um, and I've been lucky to work with lots of different systems in my lab, including honeybees and fireflies, which we'll talk about, plants, worms, ants. I just find all of that really fascinating. Um, and yeah, before I continue any further, I want to acknowledge that everything I'm going to show you today related to fireflies is really team effort of lots of dedicated people, including students and postdocs and collaborators that are I have the main people here, and I'll mention them again at the end of the talk. But I definitely didn't do all of this alone. This was a collaborative effort with lots of different people. And what I prepared to talk about today are three main things. First of all, I just want to give you a little bit of Firefly Biology 101. And we'll talk about their flash patterns and what they mean, etc. And then, since we're all based or the majority of people here in the audience are based in Colorado, I want to tell you a little bit about my lab's work with Colorado fireflies. And then I'll end with telling you about a species of fireflies that has really interesting behavior of synchronizing their flashes. They're not, as far as we know, in Colorado, but just to give you a sense of the broad different kind of behaviors that fireflies do. Okay, so I will start with this very nice video of a firefly. This was taken by Radim Schreiber. And if you happen to see a firefly flash, it's most likely coming from part of a mating call. So fireflies use this organ in their abdomen. It's called a lantern. They produce cold light through bioluminescence, and it's very beautiful to watch. Um, and it has a really significant biological function for these organisms. So what tend to happen, at least in this part of the world, is that males would fly around close to the vegetation and advertise their mating call, and then the female would be tend to be more stationary and closer to the ground and will respond to the males also in a species-specific flash pattern. And it is something that I didn't know myself when I started working with fireflies is actually there's many species, and each one of them has a characteristic species-specific flash pattern. And here I'm just showing you a few examples. And if you want to learn more about it, I recommend the link below to a scientific paper review with many of these flash patterns and more information about fireflies. What I'm showing you here is that each line is a different species. The males would have a species-specific flash pattern as their mating call, and then the females would also respond back in a species-specific flash pattern. And I already mentioned that I'm coming with a background in computer science, and when I see these kind of communication patterns, my mind at least immediately goes to things like Morse code and really simple computer language, which is part of the reason I find this system so fascinating. But yeah, that's I guess so far just the motivation that I had to, why we work with Fireflies. And recently there's been a lot of interest in public media and news stories about fireflies and maybe some of their population declines. And I would say generally some of these tend to be a little bit exaggerated, so take it, with a grain of salt. But more rigorous reports really showed that fireflies are populations tend to be declining, and that's worldwide. There's also a couple of main environmental factors that contribute to that. So just like any other, I guess, animals and insects, habitat loss, pesticides, water pollution are affecting fireflies. And fireflies also because they are using very dim flashes of light to communicate with each other, they're very sensitive to light pollution. Basically, every time you add more and more ambient light, then it kind of kills the contrast between the flash of the firefly and the background, and the fireflies tend to flash less when there is light pollution. And I wanted to tell you a bit about the life cycle of fireflies. They are, when you see these flashes outside, that's probably happening during their mating time, which is usually in the spring or the summer months. Once they mate, the females lay the eggs. They go through their evolutionary process of turning into different forms, and then the larvae stays underground and tend to overwinters. And then either the next spring, um, or the next spring, or the next spring, there's fireflies with yearly cycles, or 2 years or 3 years. Um, they will eventually emerge as adults that flash again, that you can see them outside. So it's, I guess, also an illustration that there is a really short time window where you could see the fireflies outside flashing. It's usually a couple of weeks every year. So you really have to be at the right place at the right time. Um, and from just a fundamental biology perspective, there's been lots of beautiful work um, of people documenting these fireflies and their different flash patterns. Here I'm showing you an image from the book of Lloyd, who did a lot of work on one of the families of fireflies, the Photoris especially. And I'm showing this just to illustrate that also there was a technological problem to record these fireflies, and back then, people like him went out to the field with a photo multiplier tube that is connected to a tape cassette that is then writing down the light amplitude of fireflies. And these days we can actually use off-the-shelf cameras. Like here I'm showing you a GoPro, but you can probably even use your phones these days, your smartphones, to record flashes, and you'll get a pretty good reading. So it's a good time to start getting more information about fireflies and the kind of flash patterns that they produce. So that was really the goal of the work that we started doing in my lab. We wanted to connect some mathematical models that explain how fireflies might, in this particular case, synchronize their flashes. And what we do is basically go out to a place where there is a big swarm of fireflies, and we put two cameras So we basically watch the swarm in stereo, and then we can look back at the data and solve the three-dimensional triangulation and get data like this. So this is our cameras are where my cursor is, which I hope that you could see. And this is about 10 or 20 minutes recordings of flashes in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. And the nice thing is that when we get the three-dimensional data, we could also track individual fireflies, and we can extract from that information about their flash patterns. So I'm showing you here just a few examples of these kind of reconstructions. Um, and we are starting to assemble larger data sets of the kind of flash patterns that some of these species create. So these were all known before, right? People knew what is their typical flash patterns, but we can get really precise information now with lots of different individuals and start to get some interesting statistics about it. So I'm showing you here an example from a paper that we recently published. Each plot, each color basically is a different species of fireflies. And I'm showing you time traces of the flashes that some of these individuals created. And if you remember from a few slides ago, I showed you this more like a textbook representation of each species and what is their flash pattern. And I'm showing you this here because I think it's important to understand that there's a lot of behavioral variability. There's a lot of basically I wouldn't, maybe I can call it noise, basically changes in the flash duration and the time between the flashes that occur just naturally in a population of fireflies. And yeah, so I also want to tell you about some of these recordings that we've done in Colorado. Um, I guess there is still a myth that fireflies don't exist in Colorado. And when I opened up my own lab here, actually, that's what I thought is the case. But quickly I learned that there's actually fireflies in Colorado, even here in Boulder. And as a proof, I'm showing you here a picture, again taken by Radim Schreiber, of one of the sites that we work at in Boulder, of fireflies. In the background, you can see the flat irons of Boulder. So really, they are here, and it's really a matter of knowing where to find them and when to find them. So we have been really lucky to work with lots of community scientists that help us record fireflies in Colorado, and I have probably a partial list at this point of many of the people that helped us out. And on the right side on this map, I'm showing you a few of the spots where we recorded firefly activity. So as you can see, lots of these pins are somewhere on the Front Range. And that's also happens probably not accidentally to coexist with the density of population in Colorado, which is higher at the Front Range. Um, and I'm saying this to illustrate that to know where to find the fireflies, we need people that kind of just randomly walk up, at night and maybe ran into some firefly swarms. And that just happens to be happening more often here at the Front Range. So that's the map, and I will say that the data that I'll show you in the next couple of slides is preliminary, so it's not yet published. But again, since we're many of us based in Colorado, I wanted to give you a taste of the kind of data we record for our local species. So yeah, our volunteers go out to some of the sites that you saw in the previous slide on the map, and they take two GoPro cameras and stick them inside a swarm, and then we can solve the 3D triangulation problem and create images like this, where you can see the trajectories of fireflies when they flash, so when the lantern is on. And from that, we can extract some of the flash patterns that we see and start building a data set to eventually, hopefully add to the more textbook like dictionary that I showed you before. Um, so that's one thing. And we also, I want to know that these are pictures that were taken by Owen Martin from who was a graduate student in my lab. And he identified fireflies from several different genuses. The most popular or the most common ones, the Photinus, the Paractemina, and Photoris. And another thing that we can beyond just identifying which species we might have here in Colorado and which flash patterns they produce, we can also look at their temporal rhythms throughout the year. So it's called phonology, and what I'm showing you here is basically the activity of the fireflies. Each bar is basically telling me how many flashes occurred as a function of time starting around 8:45 p.m. until 10:30. And each line is a different day in the season. So 2004 was a later season. We started seeing fireflies in mid-June all the way to July. And this kind of information is really important for us because it can help us predict in the next years when we could potentially find the same swarm happening. Yeah, this is the kind of data that we record about fireflies, and I wanted to just plug in a few possibilities for people to get more engaged with monitoring and recording firefly flashes. One way is to do it through the project that we have in the lab that I described so far, and you're welcome to sign up if you're interested. We will probably it might be too late for this year, but in coming years, we could send you a pair of GoPro cameras and ask you to record firefly flashes for us that we can eventually put in our public data set. But we're definitely not the only one monitoring fireflies, and there's larger organizations. I think the main one would be the Cersei Society that really have a really nice dedicated group for monitoring fireflies across the US. And they have a project called the Firefly Atlas. I have a link to that website up here, and I'm showing you a snapshot of the map that they had with all the observations of fireflies across the US and Canada. And they also have a long list of other organizations that are recording fireflies, and you can go there and just find the one that that best fits you. One of these organizations is the Western Firefly group that is technically based in Utah, but is also recording fireflies in Colorado, New Mexico, etc. So there's really lots of options for people to get involved. If you feel like you like to watch fireflies, go out, watch them, and then report back what you saw. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you about fireflies and their behavior and some of the local species that we have here in Colorado. I want to spend the next part of my talk telling you about fireflies that synchronize their flashes and what we learned about them. So I want to go back to this figure again with this diagram that shows us that different species have different flash patterns, both the males and the females. And I already mentioned that it's really similar. It's very simple communication signal. I by the way, oversimplified it here. The signal can be a bit more complex. There could be, ramping up and ramping down of the light. It's not totally discrete. There could be slightly different colors to the lantern for different genuses of fireflies. But at the first approximation, we can think about it like this. Um, and now I'm playing you a video that illustrates the problem. So we can see here fireflies. We can see that there's probably many of them and they're flashing, but we don't know how to connect the dots, how which firefly came from which individual, what was the flash pattern of this individual, and then potentially going back to this table I showed you in the previous slide and try to tell which species it was based on the flash pattern. And I don't know if fireflies really have, in their heads this table that I showed you before, but we do know that fireflies tend to, or the females tend to flash back to males that advertise their species-specific flash patterns and not so much to others. So somehow they are realizing that. And one way in which the males can solve that confusion problem is by synchronizing their flashes. So now I'll show you another video, again recorded by Radim Schreiber, of a synchronous swarm. And this is real. So this is a swarm that Radim recorded in the Smoky Mountains. I realize the video that I have here is kind of looping back and forth. So let me just correct and say that this is a species that flash a couple of times. We're seeing that here, and then they stop, and then they flash again a couple of times, and then they stop and they flash again a couple of times. And these events tend to be synchronous. And when they're synchronous, then the female, well, then you don't really need to solve that triangulation problem that I mentioned before. You can just look around you and kind of see the flash pattern of that species without worrying about which flash came from which individual. Okay, so that was just a description of that behavior, and I became familiar with the problem of firefly synchronization a long time ago, back when I was an undergrad student. And we learned about synchronization mathematical models in one of the physics classes, which was very, I would say, kind of like hardcore physics class. We learned about synchronization of electrons inside superconductors. But to make the problem more reliable, our teacher used a more relatable example of fireflies and how they also synchronize their flashes. And then the common idea or mathematical models to explain how this happens are assuming that each agent, a firefly, an electron, or a human that is clapping, is doing something periodic. So the firefly just keeps flashing on and off, on and off. Very much like a metronome that people use for creating rhythms for musical compositions, and you have basically just a single rhythm moving right and left. And if you have another one of these agents, it also has a particular period. It could be exactly the same period as the previous agent, but there's no guarantee that their phases will be aligned. So when you look at that pattern of both of them together, it doesn't look synchronized. But then somehow, over time, they do become synchronized in terms of their phases. So they all flash at the same time. And oops, let me just stop here. So I want to illustrate this with a video of metronomes that are each one of them has the same period, the time between moving right, left, and then back to the initial point. And these metronomes are not going to be synchronized in the beginning. They will each have a different phase or time in which they turn, let's say, right. But because they are positioned on this kind of flimsy platform, it's a wooden board, and it's standing on top of two soda cans. So it's kind of wobbly, and you'll see it in the video. And you'll see what happens. So I know the sound is probably not working, but hopefully you can still see that synchronization process by eye when you look at the video. So right now the metronomes are not synchronized, but at some point, very soon, they will become synchronized, and that is happening from small vibrations that one metronome is producing, propagating to the next neighbor, and then that metronome is propagating to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So at the end, they do synchronize, and it's not by accident. It's really coming from these kind of very weak mechanical interactions. And the thought was that fireflies follow the same mechanism, but instead of having a physical coupling or mechanical coupling, it's a more social coupling where one firefly see a flash and then respond to it in a way that gets them closer to synchronization. Okay, so one of the things we discovered in my lab is that the synchronization actually depends on density, how many flashes we see around. And I'll try to illustrate it here. So the plot that I'm showing you is, first of all, I should say that this is a synchronous species, Photinus carolinus, that we recorded in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. And the full paper link is down here at the left side. And the plot that I'm showing you here is the number of flashes that we see in each frame of our video as a function of time. So early in the night, it kind of looks like this, pretty much noise. I mean, I don't see any particular pattern here. And then later in the night, when there's more flashing fireflies outside, we start seeing these bursting patterns that I mentioned a few slides ago, where they would all flash a couple of times and then go quiet, flash a couple of times and then go quiet. Um, and this is something that we only see when we have enough of these fireflies outside and flashing. When they're in low densities, then we don't see that. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to show you is um, how we're now trying to understand their decisions that they make about when to flash in order to become synchronous. And the nice thing about fireflies is because the communication pattern is fairly simple, we can mimic it with LEDs, and then we can show the fireflies these LEDs and see how they respond to them. When we do it with a population of synchronous species, like I showed you in the previous slide, then some of them will actually synchronize with the LED. And we take advantage of this behavior to try to understand how the fireflies decide when to flash, basically when they see other fireflies flash, when to flash back in order to potentially synchronize with each other. So I want to just give you a taste of these kind of results, and if you want to read more about these results, this is a preprint that we have on the bioRxiv, and I'm happy to share a link afterwards. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is an example of a short snippet of an experiment. The green ticks above, this is the LED flash pattern, and it's very consistent, right? We kept it at about 7 or 800 milliseconds, which is very close to the natural period of this firefly. Okay, so nothing really interesting happening at the top, but at the bottom, you can see how the firefly responds. And you can see that it doesn't actually start aligned with the flashes of the LED, but eventually it does. And that's something, this is a typical response we see from the firefly when the LED is really similar to what a natural firefly would produce. We can also try to expose the firefly to other flash patterns, and we can change the period of the LED. So in this new example that I'm showing you here at the bottom, the period of the LED is a bit longer than what the firefly would normally do. And the firefly in this particular example tend to do this particular firefly actually tries to actually match its period to the new longer period of the LED in these first three flashes, and then it switches strategy to actually flash much faster than it normally would, flashing twice for every flash of the LED, but then still have some of these flashes aligned with the LED. So I think this is fascinating, and I won't go into too more details, but again, if you want to see more statistics and more repetitions of these experiments, you can check out the full paper. Um, and it seems like a very nice system to also potentially program the LED to do different things, like maybe flash patterns of other species, and the possibilities are a bit endless in this case. Okay, I want to, I showed you some of the work that we do in my lab about fireflies. We talked about Colorado fireflies, and I want to end by quoting some of the simple actions that everybody can take even today. This is a copy from the website of the Cersei Society. And I'll just go over them. And I know not all of this is possible to do sometimes, but if you can, I think this could really help some of the firefly populations. Um, so the first part is about the habitat. And when I talked about the life cycle of fireflies, I mentioned that they actually spend the majority of the year underground or in leaf litter. And it could really be helpful for them if people kept small part of the yards a little bit more wild, because we know that mowing and also clearing some of these leaves could limit their habitat where they can overwinter. Um, the second item is pretty obvious. Avoid pesticides use if you can. And the third item I already mentioned, which is if you're interested in helping monitoring fireflies and recording their activity, there's lots of different ways to do this, either through my lab, but also through lots of other organizations that I already mentioned during the talk. And then finally, spread the word, let other people know about fireflies and what they might need, um, so that we can keep seeing them for more and more generations in the future. I'll just end with a quote from a poem by Richard Newman that says that the fireflies are, in a sense, bettering the stars, which I really tend to agree. I kind of went into the firefly research, starting with physics and thinking actually a lot about astronomy. And these patterns that we see in the sky are actually much more predictable than what the fireflies do. I think there's lots of beauty in it, and I hope we can keep learning from them as much as we can. Okay, so I think this is a good place to end, and I just really want to acknowledge everybody from my lab that is either currently in my lab or was in my lab in previous years, lots of collaborators, the volunteers that help us record Firefly flashes, and funding, and thank you all so much for listening. And I think we have some time for questions, so I'm happy to take them, and thanks again.
Thank you so much. That was super interesting. I know we all learned a lot, and it's really, really cool all the research you guys are doing, and thank you for doing that.
My
Um,
pleasure.
we do have some questions that we can dive into. So the first one is the first few are about flashing. So are there specific months that fireflies flash? And when they do flash, is it only when they're moving or do they flash when they're stationary too?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So the first question about when the firefly flash, there are certain months where it's more likely that they will do that. It kind of depends on the weather. So this year we had a pretty warm winter, and fireflies started flashing earlier, at least in Colorado. So they're actually pretty active right now. Um, and it kind of depends on the location. So for Colorado, we know that we can observe fireflies usually around June and July, probably more June this year. Other places are different. So my lab also works on the East Coast, in South Carolina, for example, and then the firefly started flashing in May. I would say probably generally depending on where you are in the world, sometime between April and August, I guess, would be the interval, and then specifically for each location would be different.
Great, thank you. And then,
Oh,
uh,
sorry, there was a second part to the question about
yes, about if
uh
they flash when they're moving or stationary.
yes. Yeah, so both. And I think maybe for the majority of the time they are flying while they're flashing, which actually makes our life harder to when we try to track them. But more early in the night, we see a lot of fireflies just flashing when they're stationary, sitting on the grass or something like this. And then also it's not a definite thing. Sometimes they also flash when they're stationary later in the night, and so they kind of do both.
Okay, nice, thank you. Um, Another question is the life cycle diagram. Someone noticed snails on the diagram and were wondering how those are related to fireflies.
Oh yeah, okay. So what did I wait? I think I may have closed it off. Okay, it will be harder for me to share it again because I just closed my presentation. Um, but the snails are so the fireflies in general, when they are overwintering as larvae, they're kind of fierce predators. So the snails is just an example of something that they would eat and prey on during the time that they spend before they turn into flashing adults. When they're flashing adults, they actually not sure exactly what they eat and whether they eat at all,
Okay.
besides other fireflies.
Ah.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's super interesting. Um, cool. And then a follow-up on the flashing we were just talking about with the moving and the stationary that just came in was someone thought that the females were stationary, flashing in response to the males, and if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the females are, as I mentioned, they tend to be closer to the ground and they would kind of stay there. There's not enough information to really say how much they move on the ground. They can definitely fly, so at least for some species that from the ones we work with, so they could also move around. Um, and the males would, on average, tend more to fly around and then land on the ground once they get a response from a female. So I guess both of them can do, both be flash stationary but also fly. And but to the most part, the females would be stationary on the ground and the males would be flying while flashing. Did I get to the question? Was the
Yes,
answer
yes,
okay?
that's great.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And then talking about specific locations of fireflies, would a specific location have more species than another? And how do different locations kind of relate to one another when it comes to firefly species?
Yeah, so I would say there's not a lot of information about this yet, and I find it personally really interesting and would love to know more. Um, from my experience, there are locations where we primarily see a single species, and there are other locations where we can see five, six of them all, active at the same night. So it kind of, yeah, depends on the population and personally, I'm really curious about these sites where there's many species flashing at the same time and how they're solving it's sometimes referred to as a cocktail party problem, where there's lots of voices, lots of things happening. So in this case, lots of different flash patterns, and somehow the females and the males of that species need to distinguish between each other.
Mm, got it. Thank you. Um, and then another question, how common are fireflies in urban gardens, and is there hope for attracting them?
Oh, I mean, I think absolutely yes. Of course, as I mentioned, they're sensitive to light pollution, but I heard reports about fireflies in Central Park, New York City. So I think it's just a matter of finding them a quiet, dark spot, and that can happen, inside a large city.
That's great. And I know we talked about some ways our gardening can help kind of promote firefly. Oh, excuse me,
Yeah.
kind of help promote fireflies.
Mhm.
But are there any other kind of best ways to create that habitat and protect them?
So we see them. I mean, I would say in general, just keep it natural is maybe a good advice. Anecdotally, I can say that we see some fireflies hanging out where we see milkweed. Um, and so, that's maybe just one observation, but um, any kind of environment that would keep the humidity, which is really important for them, and it's probably why we're seeing them in wetlands environments in Colorado, would be a good starting point.
Okay, nice. Um, And then speaking of kind of the Firefly Atlas and your community science project, would iNaturalist observations help? And what parts of the fireflies should people photograph for that? Should they take a video?
Oh yeah, yes. So there's lots of observations of fireflies on iNaturalist, and we actually sometimes use that in the lab. I think it's also kind of integrated into the Firefly Atlas, but I am not absolutely certain. In terms of what to record, um, the shape of the firefly can be helpful because that could be a way to um, uh, determine which species it is just from the physiology. So um, there's lots of observations of fireflies standing on leaves during the day, even though they're not flashing. It's still helpful to have these pictures. And I started seeing some people taking low exposures or short videos and upload them to some of these data sets. Long exposure of the flash patterns, and I think that could also be really useful and hopefully something we can eventually harness with machine learning to extract the typical flash patterns of some of these observations. So I would say both pictures during the day or when there's light outside, or the flash pattern would be really helpful.
Great, thank you. And then another question here, we've got questions pouring in. Can you talk about the extent to which local firefly populations might be declining and some of the factors involved in that decline? I know some people in the chat were interested in our current drought and if that's affecting populations.
Yes, so I can talk about it. I would say maybe as a just to preface it that there's not a whole lot of information about the Colorado fireflies to really understand how they respond to changes in the environment. Um, and I think we just really need to monitor some of these populations over more and more years, to really determine if they're declining or not in Colorado. There's lots of other places where that information is more well documented. With the Colorado fireflies, we're really just starting to understand them. We don't, figure out even which species it is, what kind of flash patterns they use. Um, the populations we tend to find in Colorado are inside wetlands. So I'm gonna make a generalization here to say that it would be great to keep these environment more pristine and free of pesticides and other pollutants and of course light pollution.
Right. And kind of in that same vein, we also had a question about, lots of people having their lawn sprayed for tick and mosquito control with
Yeah.
parasitoids and kind of thinking about if you can speak to the tick and mosquito control sprays and how that harms fireflies and if there's any that don't harm fireflies.
Ooh. I'm gonna say that I'm not an expert on this, and I probably shouldn't comment on specific pesticides. Um, Mosquitoes and fireflies kind of come together in many of the places that we work at. So sometimes it's just inevitable to have mosquitoes around and also a healthy firefly population.
Okay. And then, are there any methods for tick and mosquito control that won't harm fireflies?
I wouldn't know that. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Um, our next question here is about how Colorado also has glowworms and how can you tell them apart from fireflies?
Okay, so yeah, that's there's a lot of different opinions on how to call fireflies. The glowworms tend to be referring to um, either the larva state of the fireflies where they can still glow but they cannot really fly, or females that in some species also kind of look like a worm. They have a very, very elongated body, and they would glow. And I believe we have those in Colorado as well, but I'm not sure about the specifics of the species names, etc.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Um, our next question, has anyone ever translocated fireflies to expand their range?
Oh, yes, and thank you for I wanted to say something about this. So the Butterfly Pavilion in Colorado, it's a wonderful museum. For those of you who don't know, are trying to do not exactly what you said, moving fireflies from one location to another, but they're trying to do something similar to help firefly populations, which is to rear fireflies in the lab, which is super hard, and then eventually release them to some of the existing sites. I'm not familiar with relocating fireflies. I'm familiar with these kind of approaches of just having grow more of them in lab conditions and releasing them to the wild.
Very cool. Um, Another question here is, have you ever looked at the luminance difference between the species?
Okay, so the basically the light intensity of different species. Um, we're starting to look at some species and their particular flash patterns and their light intensity. Um, um, so I can say that within a particular species, we see some variations of the light intensity coming from the lantern, but across species there's a big difference. So some of them can be much brighter, some of them are dimmer. Um, and there's also a slightly different hue to the light. So some firefly species have a little bit more green, a little bit more yellow, and a little bit more orange. These are the main kinds.
Very cool. Um, and let's see here. Where in Boulder open space can you go look for fireflies?
So yeah, a good place is Sawhill Ponds. I think they're close to Walden Pond. It's kind of like on East Boulder. And there is a strong population of fireflies. I haven't seen them personally this year, but in all previous years, they've been very active and in good numbers there. And yeah, that's probably the best spot I would recommend. And there's a few others.
Nice. Yeah. And I think we're down to our final question now, which is, do bats eat fireflies and or are there other predators of fireflies?
Yes. So there's lots of predators for fireflies. As I mentioned, actually, also other fireflies would prey on some species of fireflies, and then spiders, and then some birds, and then we know bats is also a potential predator of fireflies. And a couple of years ago, research, probably kind of accidental, from the lab of Yossi Yovel from Tel Aviv University showed that fireflies actually produce a supersonic hypersonic, sorry, sound with their wings, which the bats can pick up on, and it kind of deters them. So I think the fireflies do need to worry about predators, and they have some ways about it.
Yeah, that's a really cool defense mechanism for the bats. And it looks like we did have one more question pop in here. So we'll end with this one. Is there an elevation that would be too high for fireflies?
We don't know that answer. I will say that the observations of fireflies is becoming, less and less often as we go higher and higher in elevation. There is one spot in Colorado where Owen from my lab recorded fireflies at almost 9,000 feet, which really surprised me personally to find fireflies that high. Um, we don't know the limit, but I'm guessing that since um, their light, in addition to lots of other things, their ability to produce light kind of depends on oxygen and might be limited at some point, as you go really, really high elevations, and in addition to weather conditions, cold, and etc.
Right. Very cool. Well, I think that wraps us up. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Peleg, for this presentation. I know we all learned a lot, and I know way more about fireflies than I did previously. So thank you so, so much. We all really enjoyed it, and thank you to everyone attending. And we will see you all next time, and we'll be sending out the recording and everything as well. So thank you so much, and everyone have a
Thank
great day.
you. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.